real estate watchers worry that Canada's housing market will remain sluggish. That's where it is right now. Let's bring in Christopher Wein, Chief Operating Officer at Equiton Developments. Chris, thanks for coming in.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, let's talk about the Bank of Canada, first of all, deciding to hold. I'm wondering if that's what you expected.
That is what I expected.
Okay, because people were pretty split. Some did see that perhaps they'd have a drop down. What's your take also on the scenarios they laid out, which is basically when scenario one, we're going to survive this, all of the trade uncertainty will sort of dissipate, and scenario two, we're looking at a year-long recession?
Yeah, I do think scenario one is more likely, but I do think he wanted to leave room to have further rate cuts. Like, I still believe that by the end of this year, we're going to be at 2.25 on the benchmark, and I think it would have been premature to cut rates today when they need time to see what happens with this economy and have that flexibility that there's still downward movement potential in the latter half of this year.
I was going to say, why do you think so essentially you're saying two other cuts, not one big cut?
Yeah, I think two other cuts. Yes.
And why?
Because I think they're going to see that the economy is going to continue to be sluggish. Okay. I think that, with job losses and lack of consumer confidence, we're going to need some stimulus. And I think they left room that there could be room for stimulus.
How does this work for developers? A hold on the rate, is that a good thing?
It's sort of a flat thing right now. I think what we need is we need some other changes in the housing market. I think it's time for policy now. I think the rate cuts have done all they can. I think the difference between 275 and 250 isn't enough to move the dial at this stage. I think we need to see tax relief. We need to see levy relief. We need to see incentives to manufacture in Canada. We need incentives for developers to build more. I think the federal election is going to have a big impact, and I think some of the policies that both major parties are suggesting could actually start to move the dial.
Okay, we'll talk about policies and what's being suggested along the campaign trail in a moment. I want to know what you think is the biggest factor driving the sluggish market, and it is a market that's really slowed down, almost paralyzed itself. Is it trade uncertainty? People don't want to make the big ticket purchases. Is it the expectation that rates are going to go down even more, and so they're holding off for that extra, quarter point cut? What do you think is driving the sluggish?
I think the tariffs are a big issue. I think consumer confidence and job losses. I think people are very concerned about, where their job is going to be in the next 6 months. And we're seeing it across the sectors. We're seeing there are job losses happening in Canada. We're starting to see it occur. And I think people worry that it could get worse. I think the other thing people are waiting for, too, is there has been some price adjustment within the market, and they're waiting to see, am I buying at a good time? Is this the bottom of the market, or am I at the bottom of the valley? So I think that's actually more to do with it than the rates at this point.
We had a report from Royal LePage saying that the biggest market, most expensive markets in the country, so Vancouver and Toronto, prices have actually dropped over last year, and some of the other areas, Atlantic Canada and the Prairies, are actually doing better. Montreal and Quebec City are also doing quite well. How do you explain that? What are you seeing happening there, or why do you think that's happening?
I think there's two things. I think Toronto and Vancouver are obviously the fastest growing markets, so prices rose quite quickly during the last run-up. Okay. And then I think number two, the job market in Toronto and Vancouver is going to be the toughest hit if we do end up in a significant recession.
Okay, so let's talk about the campaign trail and what you're seeing about what you like. Some of the suggestions seem to be geared specifically, or are geared specifically, towards new buyers, right? The young couple that wants to buy their new home in the market, or somebody who saved up a lot and wants to now enter that market after renting for a long period of time. Is that the right way to go as far as making policy?
I think it's part of the right way to go. So I completely support both parties in trying to get more first-time buyers into the market and to have that tax relief. I do think the tax relief on whether it's on $1 million or $1.3 million should be open to everyone as long as it's a primary residence. So I don't think you want to encourage free tax on investors, but I don't think it necessarily has to be a first-time home buyer. And then I think additionally, they really have to work on the levies. So both parties on their major platforms have mentioned how they're going to work with municipalities to reduce the development charges and levies that are applied. And in Toronto, that can be upwards of $100,000. And both parties have suggested they'll use federal infrastructure transfer payments to make up the difference. So Toronto's not going to lose revenue. They're just going to get the revenue instead of on the back of the homeowner. They're going to get it through the federal government transfer payments, which is a great idea.
Yeah, give me me an idea of some of the levies that exist that people sort of don't really consider because they end up paying, the final price and don't look at the breakdown.
Correct. So in a city like Toronto, for instance, the levies are approximately $60,000 and $80,000 per unit on multifamily residences. So you're buying a one-bedroom unit, you don't realize that in a $500,000 price tag, there's a $60,000 development charge in that, and there's an education levy which can be $3,000 to $4,000. There can be a park levy that could be upwards of $10,000 to $12,000. So it just keeps adding and adding and adding. So it does become pretty extreme.
What would be a significant cut to levies that you would, obviously if they drop levies, that'd be great, but what would be a significant ask from whichever party wins the election that you think is reasonable?
So it's interesting because they're taking a different approach. So what I saw from the Liberal policy is that they want to see the levies cut in half, which would be fantastic. I think that's the right direction and is a great way to go. On the Poilievre campaign, they also have something creative. They're more focused on, they'll cut the levies not by a certain percentage, but based on a reward system that if a municipality can develop 15% more housing stock per year than they have been traditionally, that then they would get some kind of bonus payment, which would result in a reduction of levies. So both are going the right direction. They're using a different approach on it. But I do think, somewhere in the roundabout half would be fantastic.
As you know, the Liberal government, when it was still governing, had put in place basically a fund to work directly with municipalities and say to them, if you reduce, some of the red tape, if you do this, we will help you to build those homes in communities across the country that need them. And they're working directly with cities and with towns. What did you think of that program? Was it working? Was the concept of it sort of well used?
It wasn't well used. And I think one of the challenges is that we need to make sure that we understand that it's industry and the private sector in Canada that builds houses. And it's not the government that builds houses. And what we need to do is the government needs to be a partner in helping to build the houses. And how can they be a partner? By reducing taxation and levies, by easing regulations, by fast-tracking things, and also by making things more national. Like one of the challenges we have is that every municipality has different regulations. Every province has different regulations. All the trades that aren't able to move from province to province, they have different qualifications and so on. We're a country of 41 million people. We should be able to have a house built in Vancouver, a house built in PEI, a house built in Toronto. Should all follow the same standards, whether they're green standards, building codes, etc. Those are the types of things that the federal government could be our partner in helping us free up that red tape, and that would really get things moving along. When it comes to a car, the car doesn't have to be different from one province to another. Why does a house have to be different from one province to another?
As you know, I'm not sure if you heard that Ontario is trying to improve the interprovincial trade, and part of that is to allow workers from one province to go to another without having to have different sort of upgrades to their skill set or pass a different test. So could that fight for better interprovincial trade and workers crossing borders actually help in the housing market?
Absolutely. That would be a huge help. And we see that a lot in the U.S. So the U.S. Labor market is much more migratory. We need that same thing happening in Canada. And I applaud the Ontario government for opening that up. But we have to do it across Canada. But one of the other things we have to do is we have to make sure the regulations are consistent from province to province. Because it's great if you let me in, but if I don't understand your building code as well as I did in Alberta, then you still end up with all this lag effect, and you really don't get the efficiencies that you want.
Yeah. As you mentioned, the lag effect, the biggest thing I hear from developers is the process is just
it's so slow. It takes
so
forever.
complicated.
It's so complicated.
All right, Christopher, thanks for coming in. Appreciate you joining us on the program today. Thanks for that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Coming up.